S. Kiran Kumar, a distinguished scientist. He was director of a Space Application Center and joined as the chairman of Indian Space Research Organization in 2015, and he was also the secretary of Department of Space. He has made immense contributions to the design and development of electro-optical imaging sensors for airborne, low Earth orbit, and geostationary orbit satellites, starting from Bhaskara TB payload to the Mars orbiter mission payloads. Mr. Kiran Kumar was instrumental in evolving the successful strategy for steering the Mars orbiter spacecraft towards planet Mars as well as its Mars orbit insertion. He has also made significant contributions for evolving the observation strategy encompassing land, ocean, atmospheric, and planetary studies. He began his career in ISRO by joining a Space Application Center in 1975. Later, he became the associate director, and in March 2012, he took as director of a Space Application Center. And at a Space Application Center, his contribution again was very phenomenal. He had been steering the design, development, and realization of payloads and application activities of Earth observation, communication, navigation, space science, and planetary exploration. He has been a recipient of a number of national and international awards, including the Padma Shri Award conferred by the President of India in 2014, International Academy of Astronautics Lawrence for Team Achievement Award for Cartosat in 2008, and for Chandrayaan-1 in 2013. He has been a fellow of professional institutions like Indian National Academy of Engineering, Indian Society for Remote Sensing, Institution of Electronics and Telecommunication Engineer, and Indian Meteorological Society. Besides, he is a member of International Academy of Astronautics. Sri Kiran Kumar has represented ISRO in international forums like World Meteorological Organization, Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, and also worked very actively, especially in the area of India-US Joint Working Group on Civil Space Cooperation, which again has been intensifying in the recent time. Sir, we are very delighted, very thankful to you that you have accepted our invitation to deliver this particular lecture. And I personally have always learned in whatever manner I have interacted with you about a lot of things with regard to this outer space. Now I request our Vice Chancellor to deliver his special address.
Thank you, Professor Arvind Kumar. Good afternoon, everybody. Sri Kiran Kumar ji, Chairman, Physical Research Laboratory, Member, Space Commission, and formerly Chairman, Indian Space Research Organization, faculty, invitees, research scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Institution of Eminence, deemed to be university, let me take this opportunity to welcome Sri Kiran Kumar to this distinguished lecture on a very pertinent and relevant theme, Space Security, Emerging Challenges, organized by the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. Outer space issues are gaining salience at a global scale. India's strides in outer space has been phenomenal, both in low Earth and geosynchronous orbits. The contributions made by ISRO are being eyed by the rest of the world. Sometimes it is seen that both the West and the United States become suspicious as to how India has emerged as a major spacefaring nation in such a limited budget by international standards. India's most recent success in Mars orbiter mission is in one go has shown the world about its capabilities. Even the US and European space agencies were not successful in their Mars orbiter missions in one go. India over the years has evolved as a major spacefaring nation, which has contributed significantly in the creation of knowledge in the space science. The development and deployments of satellites have been seen mainly in the areas of scientific, commercial, and human spaceflight. India has completely been centering its activities in the civilian application of space technology. The exploration of Mars, Venus, Saturn, and other parts of the solar system is continuing. Space probes are the only way to actually visit the planets. Knowledge gets expanded since the space has been made accessible. Space probes have opened up a whole new world for us in the outer solar system. India has come a long way and has high stakes in the outer space. The maintenance of space-based assets has become an important area, and hence space security debate is becoming extremely significant. How can a nation state contain threats to its space-based assets is becoming a part of the challenge. The protection and security of the space-based assets can guarantee global peace and stability. India has always used space as a vital national interest. The notion of space security has varying dimensions. It includes the security of satellites and the spacecraft in orbit. It virtually encompasses the security of access to space and the security of the people on Earth made by various types of satellites. We cannot think of any person other than Sri Kiran Kumar who can provide us with a comprehensive assessment on the complexities of space security. Sir, let me once again welcome you and thank you for accepting our invitation to deliver this eminent lecture and for providing your wisdom on this very significant area. We are all eagerly waiting for your enlightened address to all of us. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much. I would like to make use of the sharing and make a presentation. Are you able to see the presentation now?
It has not come as yet.
Has it come now?
No, it has not come.
Not yet. Okay.
To send us, we can upload it for you.
Yeah, no, I think it should be coming now.
Yes, now it is fine.
All right. Okay. Anyway, at the outset, let me thank Manipal Institute of Higher Education for providing me an opportunity to be part of this event and then speak about space security and emerging challenges. Thank you, Dr. Arvind, Dr. Venkatesh, Dr. Chari, and all the listeners of this particular program. So what I intend to do is just talk about space program and then also talk about the issues that are related to space security. You are able to see the presentation, I suppose?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So anyway, we are all very familiar that it is the human curiosity of mind, which started way back by looking at the celestial objects and then not only fascinated by celestial objects, but also be probably scared of the tremendous lightning, thunder, and the events that happened. And then gradually he developed skills at looking at celestial objects through some special tools which he evolved. And then there were also, for example, the ways. One is by making use of the external tools that are available, and also probably there were mechanisms for understanding the universe by looking at inwards, and that is where probably India has had a huge capability which has demonstrated to the world that human beings have a tremendous capability which can be grown both outwardly and inwardly. And while the man started building bigger and bigger tools of telescopes, tools of looking at the universe by constantly developing newer and newer technological capabilities, and also the ability to transport himself from ground to different places. If you look at the universe, it's such a huge and vast thing. What you are seeing, what we are actually one tiny, infinitesimally small component of this universe, but still each one of us are trying to comprehend what this universe is and how it is growing and developing by the various technological capabilities and tools that we are building. If you look at the solar system, if you look at the entire universe, then you have a galaxy of galaxies, and then in one Milky Way you have the solar system, and within that we have this Earth, and on Earth we are one tiny component. So if you look at what space shows, space is so enormous that it reminds us of actually our position in this universe. But in India itself, the space program started with the visionary thinking of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, whose birth centenary year we celebrated just this year. And it was his vision which enabled India, which was a fledgling democracy just 10 years into its existence, when the first object was put into space. Today, you have the activities which we are going on. We are about 17,000 strong in India, which are working with about 1.4 billion US dollars, and then working on various activities, providing from disaster management to communication, and then providing capabilities in different areas to the what are requirements of the country, from drought monitoring to communication to actually not only for that and also for strategic applications. And starting in from 60s, we have now completed more than 103 satellite launches, 76 launch vehicles, and we have also launched more than 340 spacecrafts of 33 other countries. And all this has been done by developing an indigenous launch vehicle and satellite capability. And then if you look at benefits of space for mankind, it's very clear that utilization of space technology for sustainable economic and social development is what actually encompasses the thinking process of the entire humanity. And United Nations, realizing the importance way back in the 1958, immediately after the first launch of Sputnik by Russians, realizing that space activities have law, policy, security, they're all inherently linked, and space activity has overlapping civilian and military application, and the choices made about the uses of outer space directly impact international peace. So it had set up a United Nations Committee on Outer Space, and based on that, a lot of activities are going on. And human beings have transformed the Earth tremendously. You can see one of the space images which shows the well-developed parts of the globe where activities are going on. And today we talk of space as the fourth frontier, that is beyond land, ocean and air, beyond the Kármán line, which may be between 80 and 100 kilometers beyond the surface of Earth. And space is considered as the fourth frontier, and the various activities which go into this space becomes very important. And if you look at the kind of things that can be done, whether it is communication, Earth observation, exploration, navigation, then for strategic purposes it's being used. Then also you have space tourism and space habitats. All these activities are growing starting from the Cold War. And if we look at how things have developed over the years from 1966 onwards, over a period of last 5 to 5.5 decades, you can see more and more countries are actually not only developing space capability, but also making use of the space technology for various activities in their usages. And today, more than 40 nations are engaged in full-fledged space activities, and more than 100 nations are utilizing space systems and services. Space for national development in particular, and benefit of entire humanity in general, on the basis of freedom of exploration, freedom of access to and use of outer space, and freedom from threats to space systems and infrastructure becomes the key words. And then if you look at in terms of space economy, today it's already close to about 300 billion US dollars, and it is likely to increase to 400 billion dollars, where the actual activity of launch vehicles, satellite and the application systems may be about 20 to 25% of this, but a huge amount of this is actually taking place in the commercial domain, in the business domain, and that is where the space economy is growing. And India also is working towards enabling the country to make use of the capabilities what India has developed in space technology area to get a significant portion of the pie in the space economy. And if you look at, space is also being used because of the kind of costs involved, and United Nations, and in cost sharing manner, many of the United Nations agencies, whether it's United Nations Outer Space Association or Committee on Earth Observation Satellites or World Meteorological Organization, Committee on Coordinating Geostationary Meteorological Satellites, or Geostationary System of Systems. In all these things, countries are trying to work together, share their experience and share the resources so that you can make better use of human and the other resources for exploring the globe. Global exploration also, where a large number of space agencies and countries are trying to come together and work towards exploring outer space, is happening, and progressively this is gaining ground. And then if you look at in terms of how the space activities are growing, while initially the number of few countries starting with America and Russia, and then you had Japan, China, Canada, France, India, Israel, many of them. Now people are looking at building huge constellation of satellites to provide service. This table just captures some of the large constellations that are being talked of today. Starlink, which is a SpaceX company, which has already put more than 800 satellites for it. What it is attempting to do is to make sure that anybody on the globe will be able to get high bandwidth access, unlike today what most of the communication system is being provided from geostationary platforms. And because of the distance involved, communication takes a finite time and what is called latency, and then to reduce that latency and also to provide global access to broadband, Starlink is being attempted by SpaceX, and they're looking at bringing in something like 42,000 satellite constellation. They have already about 800 of them in place, and they're looking at providing something like 23 terabits of data across the globe. And then OneWeb or Telestar, Boeing, many of them are trying to bring in larger number of constellation. So as a result of this, what happens in space is the number of objects in space is going to increase. And today, if you look at more than about 5,500 objects have been put into space right from 57. And out of them, about 8,900 are still orbiting in space, and 5,000 of them are functioning. And then a large number of debris is existing. And if you look at the current numbers, more than 34,000 objects greater than 10 centimeter in size, more than 9 lakh objects between 1 centimeter and 10 centimeter, and 128 million in between 1 millimeter and 1 centimeter. Now, SpaceX, like I said, is also attempting to bring in a large number, almost 30 to 40,000 satellites for future. And then they are going through the various processes, and they have also launched already a number of satellites in the orbit. And by sending almost 42,000 satellites, SpaceX will be single-handedly responsible for increasing the number of objects launched in the history of humanity by a factor of 5. And even for Musk, it's not an easy job. And then you can just see how a series of satellites launched in one go looks when it is in the orbit. And then this also brings in space traffic management issues. Already we can see that because of the large number of objects operating in space, many of the countries which are providing services require not only monitoring and then trying to do traffic management of avoiding collision with these objects by doing specific maneuvers on the satellites. And so this is a task which is becoming important. Even in our own case, we had to do a number of satellite small maneuvers to avoid possible collision with the objects. So in future, you can also see that this re-entry of space objects becoming a threat even on ground. And probably you would have heard recently, one of the early 50s what was launched, the rocket spent object is still going around, and it came very close to Earth, and it took quite a bit of R&D effort to determine that this is a part of an rocket which was sent in the early years, and this actually had to be a lot of R&D had to be done to decipher that it is not an asteroid, but it is one of the spent objects of a launch vehicle. So these activities are also becoming important. And we also know that in 2009, one of the satellite, Iridium satellite, actually collided with a Russian satellite and created more than 2,000 objects of about 10 centimeters, 2,000 trackable objects. And then even in today's technology, satellite operators cannot predict with very high certainty whether or not two objects collide in orbit, but you can take preemptive actions by identifying a sphere of collision probability. And if there is a possibility two objects can come within few kilometers or few hundreds of meters, then you take preventive action. That is what is happening. So this is one of the risks on which already a lot of work needs to be done. And also probably you would have heard of what is called Kepler's syndrome. That means if two objects in space collide, they create multiple objects, and which in turn can collide with other objects and keep on increasing in this manner and create a very difficult scenario for all functional systems which are working today. So space debris becomes one very important threat. And if you look at starting from the early days, today Earth actually is surrounded by a large number of objects. And then probably you would have also heard that when in space station, people have started doing the spacewalk. At that time, some of the tools they missed, they are actually orbiting the Earth. And like this, a lot of space junk is there. And the increased mega constellations are also going to add to this problem. Then beyond this, if you look at today where space is heading, space tourism is one area where many companies are trying to provide opportunities for people to get into space for spending, like if you have a space station, like a space hotel, where some people can go spend few days and come back. This is one of the things that's happening. And companies like Virgin Galactic or SpaceX or Blue Origin, they're all looking at providing such opportunities to people. And basically here, what is required is a bit of training. Otherwise, anybody who can afford can make use of this opportunity of using space tourism. And then as time progresses and as human endeavor keeps progressing, building habitats in other planetary bodies like Moon, Mars, etc. is all occupying the human imagination, and it's only a matter of time before these things happen. Similarly, if you look at space mining, this is again a huge opportunity where many of the asteroids or other celestial objects could be carrying items which can be of huge value, and if economics permits, and these can be mined. And what is being attempted is mining of celestial bodies for very precious material which may become unavailable on Earth, or new materials which can be of great value on Earth. And for doing such things, human beings are already looking at, enterprises are looking at what kind of asteroids one has to go. This is where the capability of going, landing, sample return, etc. happen. And space economy, this is one very important aspect for the future, where the tremendous resources that may be available in these asteroids become one of the sources. And there are a huge amount of material which are valued in billions and trillions of dollars. So these all become accessible to humans. And if you look at, there are more than 2 million asteroids and 12,000 of them pass each year close to Earth. And then mass of precious metals in 1 kilometer of this can be in 400,000 tons and values in trillions of dollars. These are the assessment. And what is expected in future is like the gold rush which happened in America in the earlier centuries. Similar gold rush can happen in future in space. In this context, the Hayabusa, which did a sample recovery, and just now Chinese have been successfully landed on moon, and they have collected the material, and probably they are on the way back to Earth, demonstrating the capability of sample return. And then, like we said, future also building lunar colonies or even Mars colony. You have heard of Elon Musk wanting to make human species a multi-planetary species, because what is thought of is Earth itself, how long will it last? Maybe another few centuries, few thousands of years, or even few millennia, but still at the end of some period, when it becomes uninhabitable, human beings would want to find place secure for them, a place outside. That is where many of these activities go on. Beyond that, you also would be very clear that the resources available on Earth in terms of the human requirement of power, etc. One of the things is from space, if we can actually tap the solar energy and make use of this solar energy, it can be done in a manner which is actually not creating pollution on Earth. And in this aspect, there are 4 very important developments. One is energy maneuverability becomes a dominating component, and this is space sourced propellant, and because of its green nature, it can give whoever is able to do a tremendous power. So global energy dominance with space solar power. Then deep space maneuver gives you advantage with nuclear propulsion. The future fusion energy advantage with helium-3. So in all this, again, the people who can actually do R&D, put some resources and work on this will have an edge in the future. And this is another area in space where things are going to become very competitive. And if you look at energy maneuverability and dominance using space source propellant becomes a very important aspect, and reducing energy costs. And then lunar poles offers force extension analogous to aerial refueling. Then also you can talk of parallel strategy for developing multiple processing things at a lunar industrial facility. Then similarly, power that is 100% green and non-carbon producing will be attractive for future. So in this way, and deep space maneuver using nuclear propulsion. And here also there are large number of work that is going on. And then of course you are familiar future fusion energy with helium-3, and helium-3 which is available from the planet means Earth resources could make a huge difference. So if you look at all this, what this shows us is space is a very important frontier, and it has got many important capabilities which are available. Human beings have started making use of space. Initially, only the governments were active, and today already you are seeing a large number of private enterprise has entered the activities. They are providing huge amount of services, and even America, for example, is using one of the companies, SpaceX, for transporting their astronauts to the space station. And they are also looking at for future moon missions and other missions, throwing open the challenges to the private enterprise. And even in India, Government of India is looking at how to enable Indian entrepreneurs to become part of this process. And you would have been seeing that even in Department of Space and ISRO is trying to provide more and more enabling environment for people to work. But while all this is happening, and today human beings make use of the space in such a manner that if for some reasons these space assets start getting attacked or start becoming targets of rivalry, what is going to happen? That is where space security becomes such an important aspect. Already the life on Earth is very heavily dependent on the space technology based both services and solutions that are available and what is in store for future. So that is where needs for space governance for common security in outer space becomes very important. Principles of shared interest and due regard for space environment through international cooperation becomes important. Adherence to treaty obligations, then diplomatic efforts toward prevention of arms race in outer space, code of conduct for outer space activities for long-term sustainability. Long-term sustainability, like we saw, is a very important aspect. Unless there is a agreed mechanisms among the players, the use of outer space can become very congested and also very challenging. Now, transparency and confidence building measures in outer space activity becomes very important, and cooperative space situational awareness also becomes very important. So if you look at space security, what are the different key components of the space security architecture? One is, you can say, space environment itself, access to and use by various actors, then security of space systems, space politics and governance. This is one aspect. Then elements of space asset protection, that is detecting and reporting threats, attacks, identifying, locating and classifying threats, withstanding and defending them, reconstitute and repair, assess mission impact. These are one set of activities. Then measures of space asset protection, which encompasses hardening and shielding of system components, improving system maneuverability, threat warning and assessment reporting, encryption, distributed architecture, space situational awareness, space traffic management. All of this becomes important. Space security should ensure preserving the outer space environment conducive for peaceful use by all nations for their vital interests. So if you look at this, today there are a number of aspects one has to worry about, that is in terms of space control itself. If you look at the activities involved in this, will be increasing importance of satellites for national security and military uses has invariably led to development of ways to attack or defend satellites. You can easily visualize even India, the way it started its space program. It was actually among the probably the only country which started its space activity with the primary objective of providing solutions from space to the problems we face, whether it is in terms of communication, broadcasting, meteorology, or weather, or even planning and developmental activities, whether it's providing information to fishermen or to the government for their planning and producing. But all this, even once you start developing a capability, you also, as the country's economic strength grows and as the situation changes, like today you are very familiar, you are in conflict with one of the other neighboring countries, and many of the space systems become extremely important in providing appropriate inputs for defense. And in this case, it also becomes vulnerable for attack from the appropriate players. And that is where increasing importance of satellite for national security becomes important. And then defense space control capabilities, offensive space control capability, space situational awareness, all three become extremely important. And in all these areas, one needs to work and progress. I'll just go through some of the aspects of threats to satellite, what kind of threats are there, See, for example, a nation seeking to deny the advantage of space reconnaissance to an adversary can attack any of these links either by controlling the ground activity, that is either by cyber attacks or even some physically taking control of some ground stations and then attacking the sensors by camouflage or ground-based system like jamming, or optical sensors can be dazzled by a ground-based laser system where some of the countries have established the capability. USA, USSR, China, all of them have, and then making use of alternate ways, the camouflaging them, that is against optical sensor camouflage nets, and then North Korea has attempted to hide many of its things by using these techniques. Then also having decoys, that is providing some alternate dummy objects, etc. Many of these things are being attempted. Then if you look at what are the different ways by which a satellite can be attacked, one is by making jamming, that means by preventing information transfer from the space object. Either it can be done in the local areas or by having objects in space which can come closer to one of your satellites and then generating an alternate source of radio transmission and causing jamming. Then otherwise, making use of conventional weapons which are called as kinetic or non-kinetic, where you can actually destroy a component like ASAT capability, or you can explode something in the vicinity and cause problem to the objects, or use nuclear weapons, and then direct energy weapons operating from ground, and also weapons operating from space. These are all different possibilities which exist. This just figuratively shows you how it can be done. Directed energy weapons operating from ground, or electronic warfare, where from ground you try to disable by transmitting appropriate signals, or by using high power microwave frequencies or radio frequency jammers, or even chemical sprays, a host of that, or robotic mechanisms. Using many of them, one can try and attempt. And then in all this, space situational awareness becomes extremely important. That means you need to know what objects are in space, what are their trajectories, and then try and predict whether these trajectories can come anywhere close to the objects which are in space working for you. Probably you also would remember many times when we are launching, we make use of the collision probability analysis assessment and delay the launch by sometimes few minutes. This is all done based on assessing in the trajectory of our launch vehicle or the satellite if any other space object is likely to come within a radius of few tens of kilometers. And for this, a large number of ground systems, whether it is tracking radars, optical telescopes, or ground-based signal intelligence. Here again, lot of ground activities which are going on. Earlier, only government agencies were doing, but now a large number of even amateur and private entities have also started getting into this. They are cooperating with other entities to provide information on objects which are in space. And then here again, this shows different levels of from reversible to non-reversible mechanisms of attack. Reversible mechanisms of attack, when you say you are temporarily blinded, that means suppose you are doing jamming, you do it for a finite period and then you turn it off so that the people cannot actually detect from where it has come or who has done that. So you can do it on and off basis, or by doing in as you keep progressing for denial and deception, direct energy weapons, and using other threats, it can become, you can permanently disable the system also. These are all different methods of doing these activities. And then attacking the satellite physically by using, in fact, just the other day I was going through, 1957 was the first launch of Sputnik, and Americans tried way back in 1959, first attempt of destroying one of the orbiting objects by demonstrating that such things they can do. But then over a period of time, what people have realized is, if you destroy an object in space, then it creates so much of debris that it can cause damage to your own functional satellite. So people are not likely to use such capabilities while it is available as a deterrent, and only for low Earth orbiting satellite conditions it may be used, but for a higher orbiting satellites it may not be very appropriate to use such mechanism. But then the USA, USSR, China and India also demonstrated its capability with respect to a low Earth orbiting satellite. Co-orbital ASAT is, that means you have a satellite which is in orbit, which can come very close to your satellite, and it can inspect, it can detect, and it can also do some damage when it wants. Those are co-orbiting ASATs. Then hacking is, of course, like I said, using cyber security methods from ground and attacking both the ground segment systems or the space segment systems. Anti-satellite defense, of course, you need to build capability to make sure that you can survive in the presence of such activities. Your own systems continue to provide and give you a capability to what you want to provide and what you are looking for. And in terms of ASATs, then defensive systems for that, space tracking, then space to earth weapons. Then of course many of them requires huge amount of infrastructure and then expenditure on that. And then people are also looking at using space as a means of creating space war theaters in future. That means weapons placed in space which could be used for attacking. Of course, one of the disadvantage, if you put a object in a bomb in orbit, it spends most of the time in places which is nowhere, and you have to make sure that after a long period of time it has functional capability which meets your requirements. And then we have also seen, for example, America announcing establishing a space force. That means like you have Air Force, Army, Navy. Similarly, there is a space force whose task is basically to protect using space as a theater. And then this is again one of the very, you can say, trends where countries like China, Russia and others are likely to continue to grow more and more ambitious and use space as a mechanism for providing security or using it for appropriate, you can say, demonstration of capability and power. And then, of course, while going through some of the papers, I came across this one cover of a special issue where he says why Star Wars should remain a cinematic fantasy. That means it should not become a reality, it should remain a fantasy, is what he is trying to tell in the article. And then if you look at today, the global capabilities, if you see those countries which have a capability of their own launching, the launch vehicle, satellite, application, and then 3 countries have capability to put man in space. And this diagram shows that those who have these capabilities, and today only 3 countries have the capability of putting man in space. But as time progresses, more and more countries are likely to build these capabilities. And then while going through preparing for this talk also, I came across a very interesting paper, probably which you will all find very interesting. This is a briefing paper for the United Nations Disarmament Commission, Shared Risks, an examination of universal space security challenges, written by Daniel Porras. What he concludes in his article is space economy continues to grow at a rapid pace, in large part because of the lowering cost of access to space. This is particularly true, as you can see, when more and more private enterprise start entering into this business because of the intense competition and also the possibility of getting the returns at a future date, which are very significant. The cost of access to space is reducing. You are also very familiar. Elon Musk, for example, has been able to bring back the launch vehicle and use it multiple times. So in the same manner, people are looking at building systems which can put objects into space at much lower and lower cost, enabling the space economy, whether it is for power generation or for other activities. So this is one aspect. You have seen even within India, there are now entities which have started working in space program to build even cryogenic engines or semi-cryo engines or small satellites, small launch vehicles, etc. So, however, the ongoing development of counter space capability by a few key actors creates threats to all stakeholders, affecting space actors and users alike. Then he talks of 3 challenges are common to space technology associated with counter space capability. They can be dual use, multi-use. They can be destructive beyond intended targets, like what we talked about. If you destroy an object, which in turn can cause multiple destruction both to yourself and to others, can be destructive beyond intended targets. And the intentions behind use are often unclear, especially when used by the military. Together, these 3 challenges could combine to threaten the peaceful and sustainable use of Earth's orbit. Then he talks of, to understand and try to respond to these challenges, several United Nations bodies are presently carrying out discussion, including the Disarmament Commission's Working Group 2, which is looking at ways to effectively implement transparency and confidence building measures, TCBMs, that can be implemented today to reduce tension in space, including advanced notice of on-orbit drone maneuvers, adoption of anti-satellite weapon test guidelines, publishing policies on use of counter space capabilities. Furthermore, a coalition of like-minded states could encourage adoption of TCBMs by committing only to purchasing technology and services from states and companies that implement them. Of course, many of these, there could be questions, there could be debates, but then I found this an interesting article on this topic, and maybe it's worth reading. So in the end, if you look at, we are not where we want to be. This is a quote from Martin Luther King. We are not where we want to be. We are not where we are going to be, but we are certainly now not where we were yesterday. So as space, the fourth frontier, promises huge things, promises different things to different people, it's also going to be one of the arenas where the conflicts are going to be there, and it's only those who build technological capabilities and also have the wisdom to make use of these technological capabilities in an appropriate manner can ensure that not only planet Earth remains sustainable for life, but also even space in a way remains accessible to human beings. So thank you very much for providing an opportunity to share some of the thoughts and also how India has progressed in the arena of space and what actually is there in the future, where India as a country is trying to become a part of the global space economy and also as a part of the space exploration and space endeavors. Let me thank the MAHE for giving me this opportunity, and also thank Dr. Arvind and Dr. Venkatesh for this opportunity. I'm open for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for a very comprehensive lecture. You have covered a wide gamut of areas, and we have certain idea about what are those challenges with regard to the space-based assets in outer space, and how best the countries really have to see, how to cooperate, and see that the space security is maintained. So, sir, will you take a couple of questions, sir?
Yeah, no problem. Please go ahead.
So I would like to start with Vineet. Introduce yourself first, and then ask question to sir.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, thank you for a very comprehensive and illuminating lecture. So it covered absolute wide ground. And for me personally, I'm a PhD student here, and I'm working on space security issues, and probable cooperation among the major spacefaring nations is my topic. So for me in particular, this was just the right lecture actually to attend. So it's very thankful to you for that. Sir, my question is, you touched upon the aspect of dual use capability. And you also mentioned the entry of private players such as SpaceX and others into the field in a big way in the last few years. My question is actually about potential use of what I launched as co-orbit servicing spacecraft, such as, for example, Northrop Grumman's mission extension vehicle, which they've, the two of them which they've launched, which have the capability of docking with other spacecraft and servicing them, but also potentially that same technology could at the end be used to either pull satellites out of orbit or for other nefarious purposes such as that. So when we're talking about building an understanding among the major spacefaring nations on space security, challenges to space-based assets, how do we look at developments in the private sector such as this, particularly when the same Northrop Grumman today is working, or their space logistics wing is today working with DARPA to further refine that particular technology. So how would, as a nation, as a major spacefaring nation, as India, how would we approach such challenges? That's my question.
I think one of the key things we need to appreciate is technology and technological capability. Development of the technological capability is one of the key aspects in any change or growth that happens. So this is where participation of private entities, both as suppliers, contractors to government agencies, or they themselves becoming a big player. Today, if you look at communication itself, today the companies, social media companies are huge endeavors. Those endeavors are much larger than government. Many government fund, whatever budget is there, they can handle much more than that. So what this does is, when you have such technology, means such capabilities to make a difference, then how they become actually submissive or controllable by other entities. So this is a very complex issue. Now, how humanity is going to grapple with this is always going to be a question. Right throughout its life or its existence, all the time, what has been changing is the tools with which these are being done. Always human beings have tried to manipulate, dominate, grow themselves as more capable, etc. What has been changing in the earlier era, if you take, it was the physical might of the persons. So that was the initial thing. But as technological tools started becoming more and more powerful, it is the mind and then the tools, use of those tools. That is where today you have reached a stage where the social media is so much manipulating the human beings, even without we becoming aware that we are all actually, you can say, puppets in the hands of this. In the same way, this is also another area where new technological capabilities become available. Now, how those capabilities are actually controlled, who is able to control. These are not easy, you can say they are not amenable to any predefined thought processes and mechanism. So the only way to become actually a relevant player could be you also acquire such capability and you also be part of that. That is where, as the strength keeps growing, you can only argue from a position of strength. See, if you are do not have a position of strength, why will anybody negotiate even with you? That is where today United Nations also, why it is suffering is basically for the same reason. While a large number of countries may be members of this, how much can they influence the outcome of that? So this is a real challenge to humanity. I do not see any easy answers to that. Efforts definitely have to be there because you cannot give up. You cannot give up saying might is right, that is anyway going to happen. But then that is a challenge. Probably you people will have to look at how these things can be really addressed and what mechanisms can be brought in for tackling. But technology growth, nobody can stop. It is an inexorable increase, and every year, every passing day, new capabilities come and new tools come.
Thank you, sir. Daksh.
Good evening, sir. My name is Daksh and I'm a first year master student at the department here. I had two small questions to ask. First, sir, we talked about space debris. So what is the economic potential of space debris removal, and is it possible for us as a nation to harness that economic potential? Second, as the LEO and GEO become congested with whether it's satellites or debris or waste, how critical does the cislunar orbit become? And do you think it is possible to control the cislunar orbit from a nation who has developed, let's say, a permanent habitat on the moon?
No, see, for example, today, by virtue of activities in United Nations, etc., and also because outer space is not in the control of any individual, but still, like what you are saying is those who build a capability to have habitats outside definitely will find these competitions growing. One initially, somebody will attempt, and then the others also will try and reach there. They'll find a way of working together, and these are activities which are definitely going to happen. Moon is going to become a place where there'll be probably, you can see already, just maybe then one small digression. See how the things have progressed is when you can see these science fictions, etc. If you look at, or even science fiction movies, many of the people who can actually think beyond what they are seeing today, they come up with ideas and make those things as a challenges. And there are others who, using the enabling technologies, when it becomes economically viable, use them and perform those activities. In the same way, like what you are saying, not only the moon, but also, for example, Lagrange points, from where the resources required for sustaining could be low, can become places of intermediate stations, etc. So that's also a possibility. So the key to that is economics of doing it. And as the economics of doing it shows you profitability, human endeavor will definitely make it happen. That's how we have been seeing it. And it's again a matter of time before this happens.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Anand?
And probably one more thing you are asking, what about the economics of debris removal? Definitely, though at this point of time, it's a matter of concern. It has not reached a stage where it is unbearable. So obviously, in anything, the cost of doing certain activity, as it becomes viable for performing that function, then it becomes, actually it gets adopted and gets utilized. Today, a lot of R&D is going on in, like what your earlier friend also talked about, capturing refueling, repairing, or moving it out of a place of concern. So all this will become part of the private enterprise or enterprise which will do such functions. Today, like on ground itself, if you see more and more services are being provided, you will have companies which will provide such service in future.
Dr. Anand?
Yes, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Kiran sir, for your brilliant lecture. It really brought a lot of things which are related to space security to our attention, and basically it was enlightening. In this context, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, with regard to the weapon systems which are being pursued by countries, we have seen that in the past, certain countries have some specific or go after certain specific technologies, like the Russians who went after the orbital satellites. So in our case, since we are in the very starting phase right now, what do you think we should be focusing on when it comes to these weapons? Should we be exploring all sorts of weapon systems currently, or should we focus on some particular systems, any of these systems which you have mentioned, which will give us more benefit or more deterrence in that? And secondly, the other question which I wanted to ask is something which is very current regarding this COVID-19 pandemic. And as we know that ISRO's launch, actually we were able to conduct a launch almost after only 11 months or so. And some of the reasons which were attributed to this delay has been because of the delays coming from the private sector, the industrial sector, the supply chain issues, and obviously the fact that a lot of these centers are distributed and you need to get personnel to Sriharikota for launch and all those kind of things. So in this context, I think what is your idea about some of those takeaways from this crisis for India's space program? What should we do in terms of any future contingencies or risks which might accrue? Thank you, sir. These were
See, there are two parts of the first part, whatever you are asking. See, what is going to happen is India first, what it can afford to spend on what activities. Today, if you look at Indian space program itself over the last 4.5 decades, etc., it has been growing at a almost constant fraction of India's budget on a year-to-year basis. If the number has increased today, it's only because India's economic strength has grown, while the requirements, like what you are talking, requires a huge amount of money to be spent in these areas. So can we afford to do that, and what are our relative priorities on what we can spend and what we cannot afford not to spend? That is what will determine. See, today, for the situation you are encountering with our neighboring countries, some of the things will get priority, and then government will be forced to do certain spending. But then obviously the choice will be the most effective return on what you are spending. That you may have to even decide to forego certain thing, because in developing certain capability, if the expenditure is going to be far more than repositioning a system, etc., or how to make your systems redundant or multiple in such a way, even if the entity is trying to create problem for one of them, you are not seriously affected. So there are different ways of thought processes, but at the end, all of this, in my opinion, boils down to what money we are able to spend on what activities. If we are able to spend more, definitely you will build in that area more capabilities and then do. This is one challenge which is going to be there constantly for those who are governing the country. It will be their cup of tea to really tackle with these problems and then go ahead. What the technology developers or enterprises, private enterprises, etc., can do is build these systems where they see certain return or remunerations, etc. So this is one aspect to the first question you talked about. Second one, when you look at COVID as a scenario, COVID is a mechanism which has affected the entire humanity, and today, of course, we have also got seriously affected. both because of the travel restrictions and also people getting affected, etc., etc. But very soon, this particular problem will be overcome. Now, for example, we had a launch last month, and a number of them are being actually lined up in the immediate future. But for some weather events, which are now cyclones, etc., there may be some delay. But otherwise, the activity will pick up and continue. And then what the government can spend also. See, because even in the COVID times, what money is made available also will have an impact, and certain activities get into a lower priority. But otherwise, the scenario is not going to remain like that. As the country comes back to its normalcy, then this activity will go on on full strength and move ahead.
So shall we take a couple of more questions?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so Anupma.
Very good evening to you, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead. You are not visible.
Thank you for the wonderful lecture, sir. I'm a PhD candidate at this department. My research looks at the correlation between technology and power in international relations. So you have really given me a lot to think about while researching upon the space technology section of my thesis. Now, sir, the mission of the International Space Station is set to end in 2024. The US and its allies, including Japan, European Union, and Canada, have already been working towards deploying the gateway. Now, India could not be part of the ISS probably because of the unique circumstances at the time and has not yet been identified as an official collaborator on the gateway. So my question to you, sir, is that do you think India can benefit from being part of such multinational ventures in outer space, or does India see more merit in charting its own course, having its own space station, or getting its own astronauts on the moon, and so on and so forth? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's a very important aspect. See, what happens here again is a combination of government, how it wants to move ahead. Definitely working with others, working with, for example, participating in that space station activities, becoming a collaborator. Also, there was a component of monetary component in that, which was one of the deterrents. And then in any case, as India has already started its journey towards human space activity obviously is not going to be just putting few astronauts into orbit and coming back and closing. So it has in its human space program as a whole, the going into building space stations, and then probably in the long run even going beyond that. So there is definitely merit in working with others, etc. But what needs to be tackled is an appropriate dialogue and coming to terms with the various issues involved among the countries, and then getting into an agreement. This is a constant process. It keeps happening, and as times change and as the geopolitical scenarios change, things will also change. At this point of time, India has not become a partner. See, obviously, because the current dialogue that is happening has not resulted in such a thing materializing.
Thank you, sir. Madhuri is there? Okay.
Hello. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm here. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead, madam.
Okay. Good evening, sir. Thank you for that extremely illuminating talk. My name is Madhuri. I'm a first-year student at the department here. So my question is, during your presentation, sir, there was a particular slide where India was shown as lacking human space flight capabilities and lunar soft landing capabilities. So what are the logistical hindrances, do you think, which is preventing us from achieving these milestones? And also, how long do you think it would be before India can become a major space player in terms of you checking off all four boxes in the map that you showed in your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, as you would have been aware that last year when we attempted lunar soft landing, we came very close, but we just missed narrowly. So it's when Chandrayaan 3 goes up, that part of the box will get ticked. And also you are aware that we have already working on human space mission. So human space mission, in that also the India has decided to go ahead and then develop these capabilities. So originally the target was supposed to be 75th anniversary of Indian independence, but now because of COVID, it would get maybe delayed by a couple of years. But even notwithstanding that, definitely it'll reach that milestone. So basically you will be among the 4 countries which have such capabilities that will be there. And beyond that, how things progresses etc., will depend on India's economic growth, and as India is expecting to become right now maybe 5th, then 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and among the top economic powers in the globe, then the correspondingly some of these capabilities become very important, and it will be affordable for doing the necessary developmental work in these areas. So immediately, of course, Chandrayaan 3 should be able to show us the soft landing capability. And then once we put the humans into orbit, that human space capability also will be getting ticked.
Thank you, sir.
Meenu is there? Meenu Sharma? I think she is not there. So if there are no questions, we'll conclude this lecture now. And let me acknowledge that it was a great learning experience. There's no denying the fact that, in fact, sir has made all the complex issues very easy to understand. It's such an important area in geopolitics where we need to really understand how technology and strategy both are complementary to each other. And in his lecture, I think he has done very excellently in terms of understanding the relevance of strategy in putting into the emerging technology. Technology and strategy obviously get along very well in geopolitics. So India would require to evolve a strategy, there's no denying the fact, to deal with emerging challenges, and a space security will remain a cornerstone, basically in terms of protecting and securing the space-based assets in outer space. So sir, I think we have learned a great fascinating experience in terms of, as always, whenever I have interacted with you in particular in person, I really have learned a lot of things from you. Now I request my colleague Dr. Anand V to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. I have a pleasant task to propose the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank Sri Kiran Kumar for sparing time from his busy schedule to enlighten us on a topic which is of immense significance for all of us. A growing number of countries have been deploying their satellites into the orbit, leading to not just the creation of opportunities for their development, but also the emergence of significant vulnerabilities. No doubt, ensuring the safety and security of satellite systems amidst the plethora of inadvertent and premeditated threats have become a daunting challenge for nation states like India, who are increasingly enhancing their space capabilities. Sir, your lecture has enhanced our understanding about the evolving nature of space security and the emerging challenges on this front. I would also like to thank Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, the Vice Chancellor of MAHE, for gracing the occasion and delivering the presidential address. Sir, with your presence, all of us have been motivated, and it also shows the importance you are attaching to the department. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Arvind Kumar, the head of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, MAHE, for providing us this valuable opportunity to listen to such an eminent personality like Sri Kiran Kumar. I would also like to thank my colleagues, especially Dr. Manish Thorangbam, for all their efforts in organizing this distinguished lecture. My thanks to the audience who has raised very relevant questions to Sri Kiran Kumar and has also made the experience extremely interactive. Once again, I thank all the invitees, faculty and students for being a part of this lecture and making it an enriching learning experience. So have a good evening and we'll meet soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We're privileged to listen to you today. Thank you very much.